Let me start with a question. So how many of you are actually working on open source projects in their careers or just for a hobby? Or 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 4? Okay, great, nice. And how many of you are actually using open source projects in their stack and their everyday work? Probably most of you. Yes, that's expected. This is kind of the point of this talk. So everybody is using open source, but not so many are actually involved with open source. So I thought I would kind of share my story and in an attempt to show you what is the story behind open source, being involved with open source, and also hopefully not only tell the nice little story about how open source is cool, but also what are the pros and the cons of being so involved with open source in projects which have been using around the world. So hopefully I give you an idea both on the personal level of the growth I had on the personal level, but also for my company. And sometimes the question is, should we get into open source as a company? Do we get some payoff from doing this, or should we just keep everything inside our own company and not share anything outside of our environment? So this is a very active question in so many companies. So let's start with who I am. Well, probably you can't read anything, but it is not really important right now. What I wanted to tell you is that I do a lot of stuff basically, and I started as a C# developer back in 1991, so I've been doing this job for quite some time now. At some point in my career, I started learning and using Python as well, and other languages such as JavaScript, C, of course, etc. And then over time, I became a speaker. I got a few awards, and then I started working on communities in my local area, and yes, a lot of stuff, teacher, trainer, etc. We will get back to this slide by the end of the talk, because it is kind of the point that I want you to get from this talk. So for the time being, let's just say that I do a lot of stuff around the world. So how I got into Python and open source. As I mentioned, I was a C# developer. I've been that for so many years, I can't actually count them. And at some point, we had, like everybody in this world, we needed to start working with the web, and we wanted to build a web server or an API where people would connect their devices to our API, our server, so we could have websites, mobile applications, desktop applications, all consuming the same service. So the typical stuff that probably most of you are dealing with nowadays. That was about 8 years ago, more or less. That's when I decided that I want to try something new. Get out of my comfort zone, just to use a buzzword that you probably heard already. And I started looking at the Python and all the stack that I wasn't really confident with, which is Python and the web in general. So back in 2012, I was a EuroPython. And back then, EuroPython was being held here in this very same hotel, by the way. So it was for me very easy to come and share and give a talk about what I was doing. Back then I was researching about building REST API frameworks with Flask, which is a common Python framework. You probably know about it, or you heard it mentioned. And that was one very long talk, about 90 minutes, I believe, and it was my first talk in English, by the way, and actually probably my first talk, no, probably not my first talk, but almost, and it was very scary for me because I never done something like that before. And actually, I was a C# developer talking to a Python audience about a Python technology. So for me, it was like, imposter syndrome at the top level. And well, it went quite well. And what was very interesting for me was that people actually started asking me right after the talk, why don't you open source this stuff? The stuff you are sharing is interesting. Would like to use your stuff, but it's closed source. We don't have access to it. Now, to be honest, the story I always tell is that the Eve project that we will see in a little while was born because of that talk. Actually, that isn't really the truth. I was there precisely because I wanted some validation about my idea, and I got that. And my idea was to release the project as open source, but the talk itself and the feedback I got from the talk was what really made me take the decision to be brave and release all my code as open source. So, one of my projects is called Eve. I don't know if you ever heard about it. It's a REST API framework. It's tagged for human beings because the idea is that it is easy to use. You have some data somewhere, probably stored on some database, and you need to expose it to a number of clients over the web. So, common problem, but back then, Django REST framework was about to be released or just released. I don't remember now exactly how it was scheduled, but more or less it was probably just released back then. And anyway, I didn't want to use a SQL backend. I wanted to use a NoSQL backend. I was working with Mongo at that time. So the idea was, okay, I need to put a number of services online, and they are all doing more or less the same thing. So why should I write several different servers? I can just write one framework and instantiate it. I just need to configure the framework in the different instances and make it as easy as possible, and yeah, make something that is extremely powerful at the same time easy to use. This is the idea behind Eve, and then after that talk I decided to release it as open source, and it got quite some traction. Now, this is a story about a hugely successful project. I mean, this is not, I don't know, Python itself or Django REST framework. It is an average open source project. If you look at the stars here, I don't know, there is a less, yeah. Right now, I believe we are closer to 5,000 GitHub stars. There are a number of contributors somewhere, I don't find here. 131. If you think that 6 years ago it was a closed source project and nobody knew about it, I mean, it's to me at least it is quite an achievement. And this is one of the projects, probably the most successful. Another one is Cerberus. This is a data validation tool for Python. This is kind of an offspring of Eve itself. Eve is using Cerberus for data validation. So the idea here, again, is, hey, people can do data validation even outside of the REST context. So why not build the data validation for Eve as a different, separate tool so people can use it? Now, this is interesting because if you look at the stars here for Cerberus, they are 5 times less than Eve's, but in reality, in my experience, and actually back when PyPy was giving the stats, Cerberus was doing something like 20,000 downloads per month, while Eve was doing 5,000 downloads per month. So here, the first lesson is, don't take this metric as something relevant or important to judge the importance of a project, because right now probably there are 10 times more people using Cerberus than the people using Eve. But if you look at the stars, Cerberus is, okay, Eve is, oh cool, 5,000 stars, but it isn't really, the story doesn't end there, because not everybody goes and starts on GitHub. So it's a metric, but yes, it is important, it is nice to have many stars, but it doesn't end there. For example, once I got used to open sourcing my projects, I did the same with C#. Now look at the stars for the C#. Eve, in time, grew into something more complex, an ecosystem, an organization, so there are many other projects here that you can see. Many of these are driven by the community and not by myself. For example, Eve SQL Alchemy here is an extension for Eve, so you can connect your SQL server, your SQL database to Eve, even if Eve was designed to work with Mongo. But when we built it, we designed it in a way that people could connect any other kind of database, just building some kind of class, basically in Python, on top of it. So there is a community now around the project. I went back to C#, and some of the stuff, this is Italian, but don't worry about it. The point here is that I went back and started releasing C# open source stuff, because in Python it was so successful. It gave me so much good things that I wanted to do the same in C#. Now C#, .NET, the .NET world is very new to the open source, because I don't know if you know about it, but right now the .NET and C#, everything about that is open source, but it's been open source just for a few years. Before it's always been closed source. So people weren't in the C# ecosystem, they are not really used to open sourcing stuff, starring, etc. In fact, if you look at the number of stars here, it's kind of so and so. But actually, if you go and look at the downloads, it is being used. Of course, the public for this project is way less, because we are talking about a specific Italian project for the small businesses, something very peculiar, very vertical. So I didn't expect here to grow this number anywhere close to 1,000 stars. But still, I'm now releasing C# projects. This is another one in C#, for example. So, open source. I went from absolutely closed source, 20 years doing C# in my own office with my colleagues and not knowing anything what was going around us, to being totally open source, as you can see. I want to share you some of the pros and the cons that I had to face and to meet and to consider over time. Some are pretty obvious. One awesome things of going open source is that people contribute new features just for free. If you look at this from the perspective of my company, we got this feature here, document versioning, which means that basically clients can upload documents to an endpoint of our REST API, and instead of overwriting the previous document, the server will keep all the versions of the document, and the clients can go back and require a specific version of the document should they need it. So it is a very nice feature. Now look at the number of files changed here, 21 files changed, 33 commits. This is, as Josh said back then, one giant pull request. This was a lot of work, a lot of effort put into it. And by the way, I can't mention the name of the company this guy works for, but I will just say that they are sending ships to the International Space Station. I've been doing that for a few years, and they are not NASA. So you probably can guess which company it is, and they're using Eve in production in their own engineering platform. So for me, it is a very nice achievement, and seeing engineers from that company work on the project itself makes me so proud of the project, of the work I've done. And yeah, so basically another important feature we got was soft deletes, for example. So the server was able to delete, of course, a document, but it was a hard delete. Now the server can also do soft deletes. So the document is flagged as deleted, and it is not effectively deleted, and people can ask for deleted documents if they change their mind. So another nice feature, I didn't have to write one line of code for it, because people just contributed it to the framework. And now I can, and when I say I mean my company, is using these features. We didn't have to write them. We still have the responsibility for these features, because remember, every time you get a pull request, you get new code coming into your framework. You still have, probably you're going to have to be responsible for that code from that time on. When you merge the new code, the guy here can go do something else with his life. He will never look back at his code, but me, as the maintainer of the project, I'm still responsible for it. If somebody has issues with document versioning, I have to go there and look into the code. So there are pros and cons every time somebody contributes code to your projects. And of course, bug fixes. I can't tell how many times people reported a bug. I didn't know it existed at all. And often they reported a bug and somebody else then submitted a pull request for fixing the bug without me doing anything. But what's more important here is the bug. So people are telling me, hey, look, you have a problem in your code. Now, if this same framework was kept within our company, just the 10 of us working on the company, probably this bug would hit us in production, maybe with a client, and we didn't know anything about it. Probably, since we are in production, we have to do some emergency fix, try to figure out what's going on. We got tens. I would love to say there are no bugs in my code, but actually there have been quite a lot. And getting somebody, finding the bug, hitting the bug, reporting it, somebody else maybe, not even the same person who reported the bug, coming in and fixing it, it's priceless in my opinion. I'm still enjoying and taking profit from this 6 years after releasing the product. Yes, there are still bugs 6 years later, but also because features are being added, and with new features you get new bugs, of course, which is a kind of a law of software engineering, I guess, and nobody can escape. And this is very important to me. I have it to my heart, basically, quality. I just mentioned the bug fixes. And most important, longevity, or what, I don't know what they pronounce in English, but something like that. And so more eyes see more. So here, for example, we have this guy. Now, I want to show you this pull request, because if you look at the date, this is 1 year ago, March 7. Oh, I broke something here. Let's go look, thank you. Let me see if I find, okay. So this is a guy. This is kind of the point of most of you, for most of you. Hello, Nicola. I'd like to contribute to the project, so I started, and what he did was look at the code, and he fixed 21 files. Let's go and look at what he did here. I don't know if you are used to looking at this, but basically he is fixing stuff like this: typos, copy and paste errors. I'm not an English speaker, as you can tell, so sometimes I just mistype a word or get it wrong, like this one. No, this is a typo actually. Now, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of typos in my code. Now, this code has been there online, available for everyone in the world to see and review for 4 years probably. Probably hundreds of people, if not thousands, saw these errors. And probably somebody went like, oh, look at this guy, my God, he can't type anything, so look here, look here. So this is embarrassing for me. After 4 years, discovering that I had so many typos and embarrassing errors in my code. And now this guy, who probably can't code at all, because if you look at his changes, he didn't change any function, any code. He just fixed the strings here. But his contribution to the project is invaluable to me. This is a guy who probably can't even code, but after 4 years went and fixed so much in my code, so much stuff. It's really awesome in my opinion. So I really wanted to show you that, because even if you are not really deep into Python, a hardcore coder, a super skilled veteran, or whatever you have, maybe you are just starting with Python, you can still make a difference when you get into open source and try to help the community. This is invaluable. Documentation for a project like of this scope, but for any project actually, is super important. It's kind of, everybody goes to the documentation of a project, first of all. So if there are errors, actually this isn't really documentation. Oh yes, here there is an argument typo, so this is not really code, but still not really code, not really documentation. But yeah, you get the point. Let's go back to the code, to the slides. And again, longevity here, this is very important. If it was for me, probably a couple of years ago, I would be done with Eve, because Eve is already doing everything I need for my own company. But people are still improving the project, and they keep me working on the project, which is good and bad in some ways, because I have to go look at the pull request, review the code, update the documentation. We will talk about that later, but still the project is alive, not because of me, also because of me, but because of the people working on the project. Again, if this was a closed source project just for our own company, all those bugs would still be there. We couldn't know about it until they hit us in the ass, probably. But because the project is outside and people are using it in production, in other use cases, they keep the project alive. And of course, the community. Again, here it is just an example. This is actually for the C# client for Eve. So we have a client which people in the .NET use to consume the Eve server, and there is a discussion going on here about how to design a certain feature. I proposed something, somebody else comes back and says, yeah, good idea, but could be done better. So again, 10 of us in our office, we are just 10 heads, but if I'm opening this discussion on GitHub or somewhere else, suddenly we are 100, 200 people thinking about that problem and considering the options we have. And so the design, you can bring open source back to the design of the feature. Even not only just release your idea as code, but also discuss with a much larger community about what you are going to do next. And yes, this is where the pros, then there are the cons. I already mentioned some of them. For example, maintenance. Yes, can be really exciting when you see the GitHub stars count increase. It's really exciting. Wow. And you see nice companies contributing to the project, using them. But then you have a lot of tickets being opened by the people. You feel your inbox starts growing with people using your project asking for advice. And you are there and you feel responsible for these people. You aren't paid for helping them, but you still feel responsible. You should be responding, trying to help somehow. That can be, and quickly can become a burden, something you really wouldn't, I would really go out for a run, but I have to, I don't know, check a few tickets on GitHub, and I don't really want to, but I have to, something like that. Can be really, really taxing on you over time. So open source is fun. You get a lot of pros and nice features, but you also have to do a lot of work for free. And I put this one in the cons, but actually I see it the other way around. So we have a lot of people contributing to the project who aren't English speakers like me. And this means also that you get, yes, you have to fix the contributions sometimes because the English is not really good, but other times you also get a more subtle kind of problem. For example, I had a Russian guy open a pull request. I opened a ticket a couple of years ago. And if you went to this ticket and you went and looked at it, it seems like the guy was very aggressive. You should fix this. It is an issue, and we can't work with this, and you should really fix it, like now. And when you are responsible for the project, you feel the pressure if somebody is being, or you perceive him or her as being rude or aggressive. You feel responsible. You feel like, oh my God, this guy is angry at me. So now, how do I react to this ticket, to this guy? Over time, I found that sometimes it isn't really the case. Sometimes there are cultural differences. Depending on the people, on where they live and their culture, they may be using a different way to kind of promote themselves and open the tickets. Language is different. They use different manners depending if you are in the western, eastern, or southern or northern part of the world. People have different attitudes. So not Sometimes you take something for granted that people must be very polite, nice. Other times in other parts of the world they are more direct, which doesn't mean they hate you. They want to kill you or kick you in the ass. They just use another way of addressing stuff. They are different culture, and being in a multicultural project is a very nice experience for me. I've grown to understand this. While the first tickets being opened by these guys, for example, were really, I try to be nice to everybody. When somebody is not really nice with me, how do I react? Should I still be nice, or I should defend myself? This kind of problem, I really didn't expect to face something like this in my career as a software engineer. So yes, communication can be a challenge, but also a chance to learn from different people from different parts of the world, from different cultures, and multicultures is nice and good, not only when we are talking in a room, but even in a software project. I hope I got the point across. It wasn't really easy for me. And then there is the obvious question, okay, you're doing all this work, but do you get paid for it? Is it worth it from the economic point of view? Well, 1 year ago, maybe 10 months ago, I decided to open a crowdfunding campaign for the project because, spending all this time working on the project just for free, sometimes it becomes hard because, again, you have to dedicate a lot of hours, but you don't have them. So maybe the company will allow me to work on the project if we get some money in. So we started this campaign on Patreon, and this is what I'm getting right now for every month for this project. So the lesson here is either I really suck at marketing, which is probably true. I know I'm not a good marketer, but in general, don't expect money to come from your open source projects. Or if you want money to come from your open source project, you need to be very creative. For example, I don't know if you know Talk Python podcast. It's basically the leading podcast in the Python world for Python developers. And Michael Kind is a good friend of mine. I got to meet him in New York a few years ago. And he is doing some trainings and he's basically selling courses online about Python. And he got in touch with me and said, hey, Nicola, would you be interested in recording a course and we sell it and you get a share of the course? So I said, yes, that can be a way to get some income from the project. So we did this. It took a while. There was a lot of effort put into it, but now selling a course about Eve, that is selling quite well. So we are getting some money in finally. But if you are going to ask to the people, hey, if you have a project, send me some money so I can work on the project, people will say like, yes, count on me. I will send you the money tomorrow, and then you will never see them again. So you probably know, but if you didn't know, this is what happens. So you need to be creative, or you must be very good at promoting your project commercially, something I'm not really good at probably. There are some other projects actually which are getting good money just from donations, not my case probably. Now let's look at what happened to me after I released the open source project, because I mentioned to you I want to talk about my personal growth and also about the pros and cons that my company had to face. Now, let's look at the consequences. This is what I used to be before entering the open source world. I was just an introvert, code monkey, for many years, working in C# in my own office. Then I released my open source project. My open source project, somehow somebody went on Hackers News and put a link on it, and that's where the GitHub star counts started to grow, and so that put me on the front line, and people starting to ask, hey, do you want to come to our conferences and speak about your project? And so that got me into speaking, and I've been speaking, and now I want just to show you, not because I want to brag, but because I want to kind of make the point. Let me show it somewhere here. I should have Yeah. So this is where Eve has been presented so far: St. Petersburg, Amsterdam, Berlin, Helsinki, Stockholm, Brussels, and many other places where I didn't talk about Eve itself, but Cerberus or other projects, Git, what have you. So basically, I became a speaker. I really wasn't a speaker. Actually, my wife still calls me a bear. You know, a bear also, Italian. So basically the guy who is always there coding and doesn't want to speak to people, doesn't want to meet people, just have to write nice code. And now I'm a speaker, which is kind of, I don't know, doesn't really make sense, but I'm actually enjoying being a speaker. So this is something where I really changed my attitude. Consulting and teaching, I've been consulting at the University of Edinburgh, for example, teaching Python, not only Eve, of course. I've been teaching, for example, in Utrecht, in the Netherlands, Python, and just because I was, that guy knows about Python, let's hire him and let him teach Python to us. These are direct consequences of being an open source author of a average successful project. I started creating communities in my own areas. So DevRomania is a local development community, and Coder Dojo are coding club for kids. I don't know if you ever heard about it. I am the organizer of the coding clubs in my own town. And then I got a few awards. Now this is funny because Microsoft finally came back to me a few years ago and they awarded me with this most valuable professional. And now I find it funny because I've been a Microsoft developer for 20 years and Microsoft never really cared about me. Then I go and leave C# alone and started working in Python, and after 6 years Microsoft comes, oh, look, do you want to become an MVP? Why? Oh, because you are so active in the open source world. You are good at doing Python, but you are so good at you are also releasing C# open source. And so you get really, I get an award from Microsoft for being an open source author in Python, kind of funny, isn't it? I also get a reward as a MongoDB veteran or master, as they call it. And also, very important, when you are into open source, you are learning every day. This is a screenshot from a talk I gave about Git in a CodeMotion Rome, I believe, or Milan, I don't remember, a while ago. So in order to be an open source author with people contributing to your open source project, you have to always be on the top of everything that it is being thrown at you. So learn Git, but learn Git well, because people expect you to be very proficient with Git. So I'm learning Git, and then learn, asymmetric syntax tree in Python, because people expect you to be very good at parsing AST in Python, etc. So I'm kind of forced to learn new things because people expect me to know about them, or because people ask me to go and teach them. Kind of funny. Networking, ça va sans dire. And now, again, I'm all this stuff. So all this stuff kind of came out because I did something which wasn't really natural to me. I didn't feel comfortable speaking at people and releasing something as open source. At some point I did that, and all this stuff was a direct consequence of doing that. There are some cons, of course, like the burden of dealing with all these people, which they all want help from me. Spending free time maybe working on the code by night instead of really having fun with the kids, which is an issue because I have 3 kids. So not easy. I have to find to strike the right balance between open source activity, company activity, speaking, teaching, consulting, kids, wife, motorbike, etc. So in my case, open source really changed me totally, rocked my world completely. I am a different person professionally and also personally. I had personal growth over all of this because I know so many people in the community, for example. I never knew about them before. Now, my advice, if you want to start to get into open source, is take it easy. This is my first pull request ever on GitHub, and it was on a data validation tool which isn't Cerberus. Back then, and it was 6 years, more or less, maybe 7 years ago now. But begin by contributing with single, simple pull requests. You saw the guys who just fixed some typos on my documentation. That is where you start contributing to open source. You don't have to become a C Python contributor to begin with. You can start with the simple stuff. You get confidence, and then you go on working on something else. And this is very important, in my opinion. So a lot of people are intimidated by open source. I don't know, I'm shy, I don't know, I have to expose my code to the public. People will judge my work, will review my code. But in fact, there are a ton of projects out there. I was there to say all of them who are striving for contributor. They need contributor. They need people who fix their typos or who improve the documentation. So don't be shy. Toss yourself into the fight and see what comes out. I mean, not everybody can become an open source maintainer, but you surely can contribute with something, anything. Everything is valuable. And of course, make sure that you do it the right way. I get a lot of pull requests with code, very super cool code, which doesn't have a test coverage, for example. There is no documentation, and I can't merge the pull request. So I have a super nice and skilled coder somewhere in Russia who's providing me with a super cool feature, but I can't merge it because there are no tests covering that code, there is no documentation. So depending on what you're contributing, of course, if you're contributing just code, just documentation, it is easier. So I'm quoting here a friend of mine, because a lot of people say, oh, you're very lucky, you are doing open source, very cool, how lucky you are. But it's not about luck, really. It's more about dedication, will, grit as well, and also desire to learn new things. But who doesn't want to learn new things in our field, right? But the good news is that you can become an open source contributor like I did. I mean, if I became an open source contributor and author, anybody can really. Trust me on that. And these are the words of Matteo Collina, who is a core node contributor, by the way, very skilled guy. A few links if you want to get started. Oh, you can't read anything. I will upload my slides anyway. A few links about places where you can go to get some directions on how to get started with open source. There are projects that you can join, but really my suggestion is that you go and start from your own toolchain. A couple of weeks ago, I was writing an article for Code Magazine, and I was reading the documentation of Visual Studio Code. And I found there were some errors in the documentation, and I contributed the fixes for them. And so now I can brag to be a code contributor. But I mean, I was just contributing to the documentation. Game over. So start from your own tool chain. You probably go and look at the open source tools you're using. There is something that needs a fix, and you can contribute it if you want to. Thank you. If you want to get in touch, these are the links, and thank you again.
Thanks, Nicola. I let you talk until just the very end because I can very relate to what you spoke about, and it's really, 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 really interesting. Thank you so much. There is no time for question, but Nicola is here, so
yeah, just meet me in the corridor offline at the Pi Fiorentina if you're coming. Again, thank you.